Okay, let's just dive right into this explainer. So, you know that highly relatable feeling you get when you walk into a tech store, look at the absolute newest, shiniest flagship smartphones, and get hit with a massive wave of deja vu? Because honestly, every new phone feels exactly like the last one. If you've been feeling that way, you are absolutely not alone. We're going to unpack exactly why that is. We're essentially investigating a modern consumer mystery today. Are we just suffering from smartphone innovation fatigue? Is tech stagnation a real thing now? Or, do we just expect too much? For years, we were trained by these massive companies to expect giant, mind blowing leaps with every single release cycle. But recently, it feels like that momentum has just hit a solid brick wall. So we really have to ask, are manufacturers running out of ideas, or has the tech just matured to a point where those giant leaps literally aren't possible anymore? And this brilliant quote, "Innovation has slowed to incremental updates," comes straight out of a 2025 academic study, and it perfectly summarizes the current state of tech. It perfectly sets up our core theme today of expectation versus reality. Because, guys, this isn't just a hunch that you and I share. It's actually a documented, rigorously studied phenomenon. As you're going to see, the era of transformative digital life reshaping updates, it's largely been replaced by just minor tweaks to processing speed, a little battery life here, or some camera specs there. All right, Section 1, the 2023 blind camera test and the evidence. Let's look at the actual data. To really figure this out, we have to look back at Marques Brownlee's massive 2023 blind camera test. This is where millions of users voted purely on image quality, totally free of any brand bias. Stripping away the logos changes everything. Just look at that top row. The mid-range, incredibly budget-friendly Pixel 7a completely dominated the standard category. It beat out phones costing literally 3 times as much. This is hard proof that the most expensive hardware absolutely does not always equal the best results. And notice the foldable phones up there, the Pixel Fold and the OnePlus Open. They completely shattered the old narrative that folding phones are just stuck with weak cameras. So as we break down these specific categories, it becomes pretty clear that while, yes, the iPhone 15 Pro showed some really impressive computational progress in low light, the biggest takeaway here is that mid-range phones and foldables are punching way, way above their weight class. The Pixel 7a didn't just win the standard shots, it took the ultimate vote per dollar crown. That basically tells us the threshold for taking a fantastic photo has already been met by relatively inexpensive everyday hardware. Which brings us to a really major turning point. It's the burning question the whole Reddit community had regarding the sudden disappearance of this beloved annual test in 2024. Think about it. If this test is so illuminating and it gives us all this amazing data on who is actually innovating, why on earth did the MKBHD team just skip it the very next year? Well, the answer comes straight from the MKBHD team, and it acts as our massive aha moment for this whole explainer. Andrew Manganelli explained that they skipped it because the results across the entire industry had just become too identical year over year. Even using a super sophisticated ELO ranking system, which is what they use in chess for head-to-head fairness, the findings were just mirroring the past. The data proved that smartphone cameras have totally plateaued. There was 0 point in running the test again until some actual major hardware upgrades finally hit the market. And wow, does this brilliantly illustrate the core issue for your wallet? The massive marketing hype of the annual upgrade cycle is completely clashing with the reality of stagnant, repetitive camera performance. You know the drill. You're constantly told you need to buy the newest phone for the quote-unquote best camera ever. But the independent, blind-tested reality proves that the photos you take today are going to look almost perfectly identical to the ones you took on last year's model. Moving right along to Section 2. The 2025 Smartphone Awards and the Fragmented Market. To see how this innovation plateau impacts the landscape right now, we just need to briefly touch on the highly fragmented results of the 2025 Smartphone Awards. Because no single brand is making massive hardware leaps anymore, the best features are just totally scattered across the board. You've got Xiaomi winning Big Phone, the OnePlus 15 taking Best Battery, and the iPhone 17 grabbing Phone of the Year. Meanwhile, the iPhone 16 was ironically dubbed the Bust of the Year. Plus, you've got the CMF Phone 2 Pro winning for value. There's just no single dominant device crushing the competition anymore because everyone is playing with the exact same mature technology. Which leads us perfectly into Section 3, marginal gains versus meaningful progress. To definitively explain this illusion of innovation, we're going to look at a super fascinating 2025 academic paper from Deakin University. They actually analyzed the discourse of expert tech YouTubers. And this study gives a real, heavy academic weight to exactly what we've all been seeing online. It proves that the pace of meaningful breakthroughs has absolutely been replaced by carefully marketed cosmetic tweaks. The researchers spent a 5-year period analyzing transcripts and found a really consistent narrative of reviewer fatigue. Basically, reviewers kept noting that the new features were way more symbolic than actually functional.
The researchers used this concept called Rogers' diffusion of innovation framework. Specifically, they looked at relative advantage. That's the degree to which an innovation is perceived as superior to the product it replaces. It shows how manufacturers are desperately trying to create this feeling of relative advantage by promoting tiny little battery or camera gains as if they're revolutionary milestones. If they can't give you a genuinely new invention, they just have to convince you that a 5% faster processor is somehow a massive leap forward.
And I love this part. Hearing a researcher quote a tech reviewer summarizing those massive theatrical launch events just perfectly grounds this abstract concept in reality. The quote is, "An hour-and-a-half event over what essentially boils down to slapping a new number on the box." I mean, we've all seen those highly produced cinematic keynotes, right? But when you strip away the dramatic lighting and that soaring background music, you are left with a product that is functionally identical to the one currently sitting in your pocket. So the absolutely crucial point here is the massive contrast between the marketing illusion and actual user benefit. We're talking about renaming a gray phone to titanium silver or making the camera ring slightly larger on the back. Reviewers constantly note these changes make almost zero difference to everyday usability. The academic study pointed out that manufacturers do this simply to make the new model physically distinguishable from the old one out in public, definitely not because it actually works any better. This study drops another huge truth bomb. The hardware is no longer the bottleneck. Manufacturers are constantly adding processing power that everyday users literally can't even access. The true bottleneck for the average person today is software. Reviewers are out there testing these incredibly powerful chips, but honestly acknowledging they have no way to actually use that power in their day-to-day lives. Your mobile games and apps are designed to run perfectly on a budget phone, which renders these flagship processor upgrades basically invisible to you. And it actually gets a bit worse. We are seeing real regression heavily disguised as streamlining. Take flagship phones like the S25 Ultra, for example. We're seeing companies chop up genuinely useful features like Bluetooth S Pen functions and making internal downgrades, all just so the phone can look slightly thinner on a billboard. The Dockin University study explicitly highlighted this. In the blind pursuit of cosmetic changes to market as new, companies are actually removing practical features. It's literally a step backward, packaged and sold to us as progress. So let's bring all this together. This all builds to one really unavoidable conclusion. The industry is currently trapped in a tight cycle of marginal gains that are aggressively marketed as meaningful progress. We've officially transitioned from an era where upgrading meant gaining entirely new capabilities. Think high-speed internet, tap-to-pay, high-res touchscreens, to an era where upgrading just means getting a slightly brighter screen or a processor that finishes a task a fraction of a millisecond faster. So what does this all mean for you? Well, if the bottleneck isn't the hardware anymore and new phones are mostly just old phones with new numbers, maybe, just maybe, you don't need to upgrade every single year. The evidence from blind camera tests and the academic data all point to one solid fact. Your current phone is likely more than capable. So the very next time a flashy launch event tries to convince you that you desperately need their newest device, ask yourself, are you actually paying for a meaningful upgrade or are you just buying a new color? Think about that for a bit, and we'll see you in the next explainer.